Hey there team, my name is John and welcome back to the channel. Today we are beginning a brand new series called DTR, Defining the Relationships That Define Us. So one thing that is true about everyone, even the most lonely among us, yes? One thing that is true about all of us is that every person is in relationship with somebody. Nuh-uh, not me, I'm single and ready to mingle. Even if you're not in a relationship, everyone has a relationship with somebody. Whether it's a spouse or a significant other or a friend, a coworker. In our world today, we even have relationships with people online that we've never even met. The fact that you watch me on here every week, you watch me on here and we interact in the comments section sometimes, that is a form of relationship. And this is a good thing. It's a good thing that all of us are living in some form of relationship because that's how God designed us to live. And because of that, because this is how we are designed, what's true is that the relationships that you're in shape the person you become. You may have heard this said in other ways, like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But the point is that the relationships that you are currently in, they are shaping you, whether for the better or for the worse. And what we're gonna be doing in this series is we're gonna be breaking down some of the aspects and characteristics of healthy biblical relationships and talking about how we can apply these characteristics into our friendships, into our marriages, and into our professional relationships. Because I believe that if we can improve the quality of our relationships, then we can improve the quality of our lives and of our world. So let's get to it. DTR! In the summer of 2015, my wife Erin, aka Sweet Bear, and I got married. Aww. And on that day, August 1st, 2015, we entered into what we would call a covenant with one another. Now that word covenant isn't really one that we use in our society outside of the bonds of marriage, or maybe you've heard it from time to time in church. But I believe that even though this word is old-fashioned, the idea of covenant is important. Not just for our marriages, but for the flourishing of all our relationships. So let's start with a definition. A covenant is a relational partnership entered into to accomplish a goal. So a covenant can be made, as we already said, between 2 spouses with maybe the purpose of raising a family. A covenant can be made between business partners with the purpose of building a company. A covenant can be made between 2 friends setting fitness goals together, like to run a marathon. But the origins of covenant in the Bible are actually not between 2 people, but between people and God. In Genesis chapter 15, God makes a covenant with a man named Abraham. And this covenant was entered into with the purpose of God establishing a strong nation, a people through whom God could showcase all of his love and goodness to the world. Now, if you read Genesis 15 closely, you'll see that there are a few important ingredients to any covenant. In verse 5, God tells Abraham to look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then God says, "So shall be your offspring." God is making a promise to Abraham, who is an old man who has struggled to have children of his own. God is giving him a promise that he will indeed have children, like tons of them. And the other ingredient that we see is that God asks Abraham to make commitments. Throughout the course of their covenant relationship together, God will ask Abraham to leave his homeland, to change his name, to change his lifestyle, to make sacrifices, including being willing to sacrifice his own son. These are the necessary ingredients to any covenant relationship. A covenant is promises plus commitment. And this is a model for us, not just in how our relationship with God should function, but how our relationships with others should function as well. When Sweet Bear and I stood up on our wedding day, we made promises and commitments to one another. Now, have Sweet Bear and I kept every single promise and commitment that we made to one another perfectly? Well, yeah, I have. I'm not gonna speak for her. No, we haven't. There have been times in our marriage where I haven't cared for her in the way that she needed. There have been days where she has been impatient with me, or I have been selfish, or she was impatient because I was selfish. However, there are also many times where we do keep those promises and commitments to one another. And when we do that, not only does our marriage flourish, but our lives just function better as a whole. When we keep our covenant, things just click into place. And this is what happens when we enter into and honor covenant relationships in our lives. Again, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a classmate or coworker or with God, when we keep our commitments to one another, not only does that relationship flourish, but everything around it begins to flourish as well. Now, of course, this isn't always easy, because sometimes the other person or the other party does not keep their promises or uphold their commitment. If you spend enough time in relationship, you will experience someone breaking covenant with you. And while that can be really hard, and while the temptation might be to just throw out the relationship at the first sign of trouble, or to hurt that person back by breaking your promise, but we actually have a different example given to us by God. If we read the rest of the Abraham story, we'll see that while God is always faithful to keep his promises, Abraham doesn't always keep his commitments. And this isn't just a problem for Abraham. This is a problem for all of humanity, including you and me, that while God is always faithful to keep his promises, human beings just struggle to keep their commitments to God. And that is why when Jesus came, he lived a life of perfect commitment to God, because we, in our brokenness, were unable to. And Jesus' invitation was that through him, we could re-enter into that covenant relationship with God, what later biblical scholars would call a new covenant. And Jesus also said that by following his example of relationship, we could begin to form and live in covenant relationships with other people as well. Relationships where we keep our promises and live up to our commitments, even in times where maybe the other person doesn't. And so today, I want you to take a minute and think about some of the covenant relationships in your life. Who have you entered into a covenant partnership with? Again, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a friend, or even a classmate that you're working on a group project with. And I want you to start by thinking about the promises that you've made them. Are you keeping those promises? Are you being faithful to them? Are you making perhaps unrealistic promises that you can't really keep? I want you to think about the commitments you've made to that person. Are you living up to those commitments? Where have you fallen short? Do you maybe need to recommit yourself to that person today? I want to encourage you right now, as you finish watching this video, to take a few minutes and do a little inventory of the covenant relationships in your life. And perhaps today is a day for you to follow in the example of Jesus and to re-establish that covenant through promises and commitment. Hey team, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you've made it this far and you want to enter into this exercise of doing this inventory of the covenant relationships in your life, I actually have a download in the description where you can download a little worksheet. It's just a little sort of journal structure that'll help you sort of lay out the relationship, the promises, the commitments, and perhaps the changes that you need to make. Again, that download for that activity, it's available in the description down below. Just want to make this as practical for you as possible. Also, want to give a big shout out, let you know about what's happening on the Johncast this month. In addition to hearing this message on the Johncast, I'm also going to be conducting several different interviews on the Johncast with different people who I am in relationship with. And this week, I'm talking to my best friend in the world. His name is Jimmy Nicholas, who's the best man at my wedding, and we're going to be talking about friendship. Jimmy is one of the most committed and sacrificial and loving friends that I have ever had in my life. And so we're going to talk about what is friendship, how is he such a good friend, what are the aspects of a godly friend. And so if you're interested in hearing that conversation, it will only be on the Johncast. So I highly recommend that you go wherever you find your podcasts and you check that out. That is all I have for you today. I love you all. Keep being awesome.